You think of the 1970s and you think flower power and disco. You probably don't think of skinhead gangs. Like, you're probably not dressing up in tiny little braces and combat boots to go to your workplace's decade's Christmas party. But skinhead gangs were really popular. The National Front is a fascist political party in the UK that was founded in 1966. Not to be confused with Le Front National, which is a totally different party in France that makes it really hard to Google the British one. And in the 1970s, it was huge. In the 1977 elections, over 200,000 people voted for National Front candidates, and over half those voters were here in London. A survey from 1978 found that 1 in 7 young people were willing to support the National Front, and in the 1979 election, they fielded 303 candidates, enough that by law they had to be allowed to run party political broadcasts on national television. Alongside the more respectable kind of politics, they were also doing the skinhead kind, purposefully going into areas that have a lot of immigrants in order to terrify them. That's like fascists' favourite thing to do, because they've not got anything else going for them. In London, the flashpoints in the 70s were Brick Lane and Southall, both of which had a lot of Asian immigrants. The NF had a stall at Brick Lane Market where you could buy their merch, including a Holocaust-denying pamphlet called Did 6 Million Really Die? In the summer of 1979, several left-wing targets were bombed, including a socialist bus driver, a milkman, the Communist Party headquarters, and the left-wing bookshop Houseman's. The NF and fascist skinheads would regularly hold marches in Asian neighbourhoods, not because they had a lot of supporters there, but to scare the locals. But today, look, I won't say that the National Front isn't technically still going, but their Wikipedia page has a section called Further Decline 1990 to Present, and their website is a WordPress blog that still has a sample page on it. Oh my god! You can very easily live your whole life in the UK without realising that these guys are technically still keeping the lights on. They've been completely defeated at the ballot box, they've never had a member get to Parliament, and on the very rare occasion that one of them gets on a local parish council, they get booted off because they don't dare show their faces at actual meetings. So, fascists have been beaten before, and without a world war. In this video, I'm going to tell you how it was done. As always, this is a London channel, so I'm not going to be covering what was going on in Brighton or Bradford, but I do encourage you to make your own video about your town's history. If you'd like to disagree with me about something, you are welcome to do so in the comments, but you will have to provide a source. I will be putting my sources up here in the corner. So, how do you defeat fascists? I suppose the first thing I have to do is prove that the NF are fascists, don't I? Like most modern far-right groups, the NF didn't claim to be Nazis, and part of your job, if you want to oppose them, is making that label stick. Now, I can tell they're Nazis because of the things they say and believe, but if you need more obvious proof, then this is their first chairman, A.K. Chesterton, who was a member of the British Union of Fascists. So there we go. But if you want a bit more, by the mid-70s, their chairman is this guy, John Tyndall, who was formerly a member of the National Socialist movement. Remember, Nazi is short for National Socialist, which he founded on Hitler's birthday. After that, he founded another far-right group called the Great Britain Movement, which he said would advocate for pure National Socialism and not deviate from certain tenets fundamental to the Hitler faith. Here's a picture of him in what is not a Nazi brown shirts uniform. That's the uniform for his brown shirt play acting group called Spearhead, which I'm sure just looks like that as a coincidence. Here's another one, And another one. Go on, one more. They had a photographer at their Nazi meetup. John Tyndall really wanted you to know that he loved the Nazis. If you don't think he was a Nazi, he'd probably be mad at you. But with the National Front, he wanted it to be less explicitly Nazi in order to lure in people who were simply very racist and turn them into fascists. The English far right is actually quite a diverse bunch. I mean, politically, not ethnically. It's hard to get English nationalists who love World War II in the same bed as Nazi cosplayers. But by the beginning of the 1970s, the founders of the National Front realised that they could unite a lot of far-right groups if they concentrated on something they all agree on. They hate immigrants. Activist Darcus Howe said, "There emerged in this society a cluster of political groups whose one linkage between themselves was that they wanted blacks out of this country." Something that we're going to have to know for this video is that in the 1970s, people used the word black when these days we'd say black and Asian. These days, major political parties actively court voters who hate immigrants. But in the 70s, that isn't really the case. In 1968, British politician Enoch Powell had delivered what is now commonly known as the Rivers of Blood speech, where he argued that because of immigration from non-white countries, and because of the first anti-discrimination laws, in 15 or 20 years' time, the black man will have the whip hand over the white man. And that, as I look ahead, I am filled with foreboding. Like the Roman, I seem to see the river Tiber foaming with much blood. Afterwards, the Conservative Party fired him from his shadow cabinet position, and the Tory leader, Edward Heath, called his speech racialist, which is the 1960s word for racist. So, if you agree with Enoch Powell, then the Tory party is clearly saying, you're not welcome here. At the same time, a lot of Asian people are arriving in the UK, including from East Africa. When both places were part of the British Empire in the 1890s, workers from the Indian subcontinent were imported to Kenya, Uganda and Tanzania to build railways. After these African countries became independent, some of them wanted the Asians out. In 1968, Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya announced that Asians would never get Kenyan citizenship. After Idi Amin conquered Uganda in 1971, he announced that Asians with British passports would be expelled. Tens of thousands of Asians fled to the UK. This is actually when former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's parents came here. The Conservatives set up something called the Uganda Resettlement Board to help families find people to stay with. So if you don't like immigrants, you're looking at the Tory party and thinking, I don't want to support those guys, but I can't be a filthy lefty. So your only options are to A, stop being racist, or B, find another political home. In the span of less than a year, National Front membership rose by more than 50%. In some constituencies, they start polling in double digits. On the 11th of June 1978, 150 white youths ran down Brick Lane shouting, "Kill the black bastards," and smashing the windows of a dozen shops and the car windscreens of Bengali shopkeepers. 55-year-old Abdul Monan was knocked unconscious by a hail of rocks and stones hurled through his shop window. He ended up in hospital where he needed 5 stitches in his face. He lost 2 of his teeth. The police said that the spontaneous outbreak happened just at the time they were changing shift and that they were totally unprepared for it. This wasn't an isolated incident. Over 100 such instances were collected in East London alone between 1976 and 1978. So, anti-fascists have to organise. Some of the earliest groups to recognise the threat posed by the NF were Jewish groups, like the Board of Deputies of British Jews, who collected discrediting information on the NF's political candidates and sent it to the media and rival parties. This is one strategy that really works, outing the Nazis. Once you've found one, a lot of the regular racists won't want to be seen standing next to him, so you can cause them to split. After these photos started coming out, a former NF chairman went on national primetime TV to accuse John Tyndall of being a neo-Nazi. And within a month, they'd voted him out, and the NF lost thousands of members who went off to form a splinter group. One anonymous former NF member said that she left after seeing a picture of John Tyndall wearing a swastika. "I won't stand for any of this Sieg Heil nonsense." You don't even have to argue against their policies. You can just be like, sounds like what a fascist would say. There is a problem with this strategy, though. If you spend all your time focusing on who's a secret Nazi, then you're not prepared if someone comes along who has all the NF's policies, but is smart enough to have never been photographed standing in front of a swastika. In the 1970s, it was a really successful strategy, and it's apparently faster than trying to convince people that racism is bad, but it doesn't address the fact that what the NF wanted was to hurt Black and Asian people. So it is a useful life skill to be able to tell when someone's a fascist, even when they're not wearing a swastika. So, very quickly, a fascist acts as if your nation is the most important thing about you, and they believe that their nation used to be great, but outsiders, usually communists, Jews, immigrants and the gays, have humiliated it, and one day they will purge the outsiders and their nation will rise again. And alone, this strategy of outing Nazis isn't enough. 100,000 people voted for the NF in the 1974 general election. Between 1975 and 1977, assaults, robberies and violent thefts committed against Black and Asian British people rose by a third. And in May 1976, another group of East African Asians arrives, this time from Malawi. The press go hysterical about it, claiming they were being put up in 4-star hotels at the taxpayers' expense. The Sun published the headline, "Scandal of £600 a week immigrant." The Mirror, "New flood of Asians to Britain." On the Telegraph, "Invasion of Asians forces Borough to call for help." The NF gets 3,000 new members. On the 4th of June 1976, Gurdeep Singh Chaggar was fatally stabbed in the strongly Asian area of Southall. Suresh Grover was walking down the high street hours later when he saw a pool of Chaggar's blood on the floor. He asked a nearby police officer what had happened and was told, "It was just an Asian." Grover covered the blood with a cloth and put bricks around it so that no one would step in it. The day after Chaggar's death, thousands blocked the street and marched to the police station demanding justice. The police arrested 2 of the protesters. They were released later that day after a sit-in protest. In the aftermath, young local Asians formed the Southall Youth Movement, which has been called a turning point for Asians in the whole country. One of their founding members, Balraj Purwal, says that their job was to make Southall a no-go zone for racists. We would know which pubs they're meeting in. I remember going to one in Alworth. They used to meet there and plan which estate to attack. There used to be 80 to 90 of us.
It's not that gangs of Paki bashers came and we ran away. On the contrary, on more occasions than one, we got tired of running away. My name is Tariq Mahmood. I grew up in England in the 1970s and grew up in a wave of racist violence on the street. I have lost count on the number of occasions where I myself alone was attacked and beaten. Yeah, sometimes you had gangs of racist white youth who themselves would think they were really anti-Nazi because their fathers or grandfathers had fought in the war against Nazi Germany. Yet after the pubs closed, they would just as equally go on what they used to be called Paki hunting or Paki bashing. This meant that in some areas, not everywhere, but in some areas, young white men, and sometimes with women as well, they would go out and hunt us down, beat us up. That was happening in East London, in South London, in Chorley, in Bradford, and Birmingham, and lots of different areas. We needed to protect our houses. The police couldn't do it. There were firebombs going on. As you know, if you look into London's history, not one but more massacres, like the New Cross massacre would take place a few years later. But the local youth of East London were really quite remarkable. We would have a few hundred of us. They would be at the bottom end of Brick Lane when the racist came. Real physical hands-on. If they were next, we'll get a message. There's a gang coming along Commercial Road, so we'd have to send a detachment.
This is another tactic that worked, disrupting their meetings and marches. Every time the NF tried to hold a public meeting, anti-fascists would be there, and groups like the Southall Youth Movement tried to bust up the private ones too. If enough people are shouting, they can't get anything done. In 1979, the NF were trying to have a meeting in West Bromwich that kept getting interrupted by hecklers. Their stewards tried to evict the hecklers, but eventually the police simply cleared the hall and the meeting had to be abandoned. And you can do this non-violently by blocking the road or camping outside their meeting halls. That does do some good. It makes them ashamed to show their faces, so not as many turn up. Or it might mean that they have to change plans at the last minute. On the 7th of September 1974, the NF planned a march through Hyde Park, but 7,000 counter-protesters blocked the route. So the police had to reroute the fascists to Lincoln's Inn Fields, which is quite a long way away. But violent counter-protest, throwing bottles or keeping them out by force, that also works in a second way. If the police think there's going to be violence at an NF march, then the simplest way for them to stop the violence is to ask the Home Secretary to ban the march. In 1977, the government banned a march in Manchester and placed a 2-month ban on NF marches in London. This protects the local neighbourhoods that the NF is marching through, although, of course, the dangers of this one are pretty obvious. On the 13th of August 1977, the NF held a march at Clifton Rise in Lewisham. The Home Secretary refused to ban it from going ahead, so instead, a quarter of the Metropolitan Police was deployed to Lewisham and issued with riot shields to protect the fascists. 3,000 to 5,000 anti-fascists turned up, against just 500 or 600 NF marchers. Fighting broke out between anti-fascists and police, and 214 anti-fascists were arrested, twice the number arrested at the Battle of Cable Street, which is a similar anti-fascist battle from the 1930s that I did a video about here. After the Battle of Lewisham, the main anti-fascist organisers there, the Socialist Workers' Party, or SWP, knew they needed allies. They were outnumbered at least 3 to 1 by the NF in terms of membership, and there had been attacks on SWP members. They needed to create a place where moderates and people who weren't up for a street brawl could still help, while they carried on being militant. So they formed the Anti-Nazi League, the ANL. I'm sorry, there's just going to be a lot of initials in this video. What was it with the 20th century and initials? The idea was similar to the idea that the NF had had, to unite a load of disparate groups under a single issue: get Nazis out. Jewish groups, communists, socialists, trade unions and anti-racist groups could all agree on this one thing. SWP Secretary Jim Nicol said, "It would have to be a complete single issue that excluded nobody. If you were for fighting Nazis, that was it." From the beginning, it had a really broad base of support from civil society, with its first meeting held at the actual House of Commons, and support from politicians like Lord Brockway and Neil Kinnock, and celebrities like Alfie Bass, Prunella Scales, Iris Murdoch, Melvyn Bragg, Warren Mitchell, Bill Owen, Terry Venables, Jack Charlton and Brian Clough. I promise these people were famous in the 70s. By 1978, 50 Labour MPs had come out in support, including the then Cabinet Minister, Tony Benn. When I was researching this, I was shocked how popular it was, given that I'd never heard of this group before. There were loads of branches of the Anti-Nazi League. There was skateboarders against the Nazis, and aardvarks against the Nazis, and school kids against the Nazis. There was a pub in Manchester called The Albert against the Nazis. Your uni might have a group. After the NF made inroads with Tottenham Hotspur fans, some of them formed Spurs Against the Nazis, who welcomed the Argentinian players Oswaldo Ardiles and Ricardo Villa and organised a huge five-a-side football tournament with Peter Cook and Bill Oddie as referees. I promise these people were famous in the 70s. So people put aside differences to work on this one issue, and there were some big differences.
Remarkable. I'm a Pakistani of Kashmiri ancestry, and we're dealing with Bangladesh's trauma of birth following the incredible brutality of the Pakistani military and what they did there, the slaughter, the rape, the pillage. Yet we were all working together, fighting against a common enemy on the streets of England.
The Board of Deputies of British Jews had a lot of Zionist members, whereas a lot of people in the SWP were anti-Zionist. It took a lot of hammering out in meetings, but eventually they agreed to a truce. If the anti-Zionists did their work with other organisations and left the ANL out of it, then the Board of Deputies could make their peace with it. And out of the ANL came my favourite anti-fascist organisers of the decade, Rock Against Racism.
Hi, my name is Red Saunders. I'm a multicultural activist, co-founder of Rock Against Racism, and I wrote the letter that kicked it all off. Whites only, white power and all that sort of stuff was really growing, and the National Front had a real breakthrough. They seemed to strike a chord with a lot of working class people, and they took huge steps forward, and they started to. The first really alarming moment was when they beat the Liberals in the local elections in London, and that was the real sign that they were on the move. One of the co-founders, Roger Huddle, and I had actually been involved in a political campaign called the Right to Work campaign. As I talked earlier, part of the dark times was the mass unemployment, especially of young people. And so there was a campaign that had been set up by a left group, the Socialist Workers' Party, the Right to Work campaign, and they'd have marches from Birmingham to London or Carlisle or all over the country, and they would try and mix in a bit of culture, a little bit of music, a bit of, not just a regular, just straight political event. So they tried to do bits and bobs. And I was up in Coventry where I was in an agitprop theatre group at that time.
So, at this point, I have to tell you why Rock Against Racism was formed. And if you don't know this bit, you're going to want to strap in. In the summer of 1976, David Bowie, the funny spaceman pop star, told Playboy magazine, the one with the bunnies, "I believe very strongly in fascism. The only way we can speed up the sort of liberalism that's hanging foul in the air at the moment is to speed up the process of a right-wing, totally dictatorial tyranny." Adolf Hitler was one of the first rock stars. In that same year, Eric Clapton, one of the most successful musicians in the world, the guy who sings Layla, got up on stage and... Bowie and Clapton walked their comments back, sort of, in later years, but the point isn't that they are personally bad people, but that baby fascists in their audience are going to be emboldened by this. Like, yeah, that's right. If he can say it, so can I.
There was this article in Melody Maker saying that Eric Clapton had said that Enoch Powell was the man to lead the country. And it's like, what? This is Eric Clapton, the man who's, the blues god, the man who plays black American blues music, and he's a brilliant musician and all the rest of it. And I was a fan, I had the albums, I'd been to see Blind Faith, I'd been to see Cream, I was a big rock fan at that time. And so we talked about this at rehearsals. I was like, this is extraordinary. And that evening I sat down and I was so outraged, I wrote a letter. And I don't know, I'm kind of pausing for a moment to say, I don't know if you want me to read the letter.
Oh my gosh, that would be brilliant. I was gonna just have it up on the screen, but that would be fantastic if you could read it. Yes, please.
When we read about Eric Clapton's Birmingham concert, where he urged support for Enoch Powell, we nearly puked. You've been taking too much of that Daily Express stuff. You know you can't handle it. Own up, half your music is black, and you are rock music's biggest colonialist. You're a good musician, but where would you be without the blues and R&B? Rock was and still can be a real progressive culture, not a package, mail order, stick-on nightmare of mediocre garbage. Keep the faith, black and white, unite and fight. We want to urge a rank and file movement against the racist poison in rock music. We urge support. All those interested, please write to Rock Against Racism. P.S. Who shot the sheriff, Eric? Sure as hell wasn't you, mate. And we posted that letter to all the music press at the time, the left press and the black music press. And to our utter amazement, it was printed in nearly all of them.
He got hundreds of responses.
A friend of mine who'd given me that P.O. box for us to use, he called me up and he said, Red, there's like 500 letters here. I was like, what? And they were from everywhere, from Aberystwyth to Inverness to Plymouth to East Anglia to Wales to Cardiff to London. They were from all over the country. And a little later on, we'd really checked them. And we found out the average age was between 13 and 17. So it really hit youth.
So all these people formed Rock Against Racism, which put on gigs for anti-racist causes. The idea was that you'd have a white band, often a rock band or a punk band, and a black band, often a reggae band, on the same bill. And then at the end, the bands would come back on stage and jam together.
What we always wanted to do was to do an unheard of thing at that time, was to mix musicians together, especially to mix black and white musicians together, because that would be the way to break people's fear down and to open up and bring together that harmony, that unity, that key unity that was to really sweep the whole campaign for the next 6 years. Was the united front culturally, you know.
Generally, you couldn't get white audiences interested in black music. RAR tried to change that. Again, I had no idea how big this was. The Clash played for RAR. Elvis Costello played for them. Adam and the Ants, Joy Division, Pete Townsend from The Who, 2 members of the Jimi Hendrix Experience played for RAR. They had a fanzine called Temporary Hoarding. At its height, it was selling 12,000 copies per issue for a punk fanzine. By 1978, a local election was coming up, and so, to combat the NF, Rock Against Racism decided to put on their biggest event ever. They'd have a demo for the A&L in Trafalgar Square, and then they'd march to East Hackney, where John Tyndall was running, for a concert.
And so there we were early, and as each kind of hour went past, 7, 8, I was going, my God, nobody's going to come, you know. And at 8 o'clock, I'm going to go off and have a cup of tea and a bacon butty, you know. And I went off, and I came back about 9 o'clock, and the first couple of coaches arrived at the top of Trafalgar Square by the National Gallery, and it was like a piece of wonderful theatre out of a movie or something. These coaches arrived, and the kind of doors open, and all these kind of punks tumbled out, and all the kind of wafting smoke coming out of the coaches, you know. And these were the first coaches from Liverpool. Every 10 minutes another coach would come, and suddenly by 10, 11 o'clock, Trafalgar Square was packed.
So many people turned up that the head of the procession made it to the concert venue, while the end was still in Trafalgar Square, a 2-hour walk away. The punk singer Polystyrene dressed as Margaret Thatcher with an African headscarf. Tom Robinson sang a song called Glad to be Gay.
And then the sun came out, and in came the beginning of 100,000 people into the park. And I ran out on stage and I went, this ain't no fucking Woodstock. This is the carnival against the Nazis. And bang, off we went. And you say, what are my memories? The rest of the day was a complete bloody haze. I mean, I remember the Clash coming on, Jimmy Percy, Steel Pulse, all dressed in Ku Klux Klan. I mean, you know, Birmingham's leading reggae band dressed as Ku Klux Klan members, doing their anti-racist militant. It was just incredible.
The Socialist Worker newspaper said, they stood in the sun together. 80,000. No trouble. Magic. The next day, the National Front held a walk through London's East End. Nearly 200 attended. It was secret. It rained all the way. Even God has joined the Anti-Nazi League. This wasn't a po-faced socialist meeting that you had to read books for, or even a slightly dry YouTube video with citations. This was a fun, free concert aimed at convincing teenagers not to join the NF. But there were downsides to having such broad appeal. In September of that year, RAR held a second massive concert, this time in Brockwell Park, while the NF held a march down Brick Lane in East London.
There was a call made by the sort of skinheads, the fascists, far-right racists, that they were coming to Brick Lane. This was on the day of a massive Rock Against Racism concert.
The NF tactic then, whatever happened, I don't know, because I was on stage in the middle of all this, or, you know, trying to run the show and all the rest of it. They did this tactic of going to Brick Lane and just attacking Brick Lane, I know, which was a clever move on their sense, because they knew all the energy of most anti-fascists was going to be down in Brixton, you know.
We had scouts all around, telephone boxes around East London. Because my arm was injured and in a huge bandage, I monitored the telephone system. And we sent countless messages to the organizers of the festival. I myself sent the messages as well. Please send us a few contingents. We are facing severe attack. They never once replied. We know messages got there because they came back eventually.
The Anti-Nazi League did, I think, organise 2 coaches very, very rapid when they heard what was happening. But of course it was all too late because they'd been caught out. Now maybe they should have been on the case to expect something in Brick Lane, but obviously all the energy had gone on the Brixton Carnival.
That left me a very bitter taste in my mouth at the time. I was so angry, almost as angry as I was against the attackers. You know, we felt betrayed.
And I don't think that if there was any selling, there was some mistake in the response or tactic, but God, in no way they've been betrayed, because the A&L had been regularly down Brick Lane and all sorts of different anti-racist groups. I don't feel there was any sense of betrayal. There may have been a tactical mistake.
If it was not for the courageousness of the youth of East London, pretty much mostly Bangladeshi, or from Bangladesh, and the support of some of the white friends who were with us, who did primary monitoring and assisting like that, I think it could have ended up in an absolute catastrophe. Really a shame to those who wanted to dance when the racists were trying to dance over the streets of Brick Lane.
But in terms of the election, the NF did really badly. And whenever fascists feel humiliated, they lash out. On the day of the election, a group of racists attack a Bangladeshi man called Altab Ali on his way home from work and murder him near Brick Lane, stabbing him in the chest. His attackers didn't know him. In fact, they admitted that it was a purely race-based attack, saying, in response, the Federation of Bangladesh Youth Organisations organised Ali's funeral. 7,000 people, mostly Bengalis, carry his coffin from Brick Lane to the steps of 10 Downing Street, demanding action from the government.
We were regular because sometimes there would be the marches, certainly are following the death of people like Altab Ali, Ishaq Ali, very sad occasions, defiant marches, not mournful marches, organizing marches, not just tearful marches, they were there as well.
A month later, on the 11th of June 1978, a mob of skinheads attacks Brick Lane, smashing windows and damaging property. Racist violence reaches its height that summer. In response, Asian Londoners start setting up self-defence groups.
We needed to organise our own communities and begin the process of building self-defence. And self-defence here does not simply mean sticks and stones and knives and daggers. Self-defence is also when the women began to organise for their own voices, when different sections of the community fought for different rights. It is all a part and parcel. But the Asian youth movements, formations in Bradford, in Southall, Coventry, Birmingham, East London, Haringey, just to name Luton, just to name a handful really. Whilst they were all independent, what produced them were the same environment.
And this is another strategy that works. By September, the NF had moved its headquarters away from Brick Lane and gone to Islington instead. Something else that worked was respected sources like the Labour Party and mainstream newspapers coming out in full force against it. Labour used one of their party political broadcasts in 1977 to link the NF to Hitler, Mussolini, and Nazi concentration camps. Millions of people saw the message that the NF were Nazis. On top of that, the newspapers hammered the point home after the broadcast, with The Sun saying that the NF are about the nastiest bunch of characters on the British political scene. Later that year, the News of the World published an article called The Secret Crimes of Führer Tyndall. The NF wanted to make 1979 their biggest election yet, fielding 303 candidates in total. Many of these candidates were in areas that the NF had no chance of winning, but it gave them an excuse to hold meetings in immigrant neighbourhoods to intimidate the locals, including in Southall. On the 23rd of April 1979, the NF were due to have a meeting at Southall Town Hall. The local Indian Workers Association tried to get the council to refuse to hire the space out to them. No platforming was another tactic that had worked in the past.
And we can't negate these by coming up with rebuttals or clever arguments. We had come to a conclusion the only way to defeat organized fascism was by organizing and smashing it. We did not believe in debating it. We did not believe in giving a platform to the fascists. In fact, that's why the left and the anti-fascists would go and use the old slogan from the East End of London, "They shall not pass."
In 1974, Labour advised all its candidates not to participate in any debate or discussion with an NF candidate. By 1975, lots of Labour councils were refusing to hire out their halls to the National Front. When the NF tried to protest these decisions, counter-demonstrators vastly outnumbered them. For example, on the 25th of March 1975, they tried to hold a meeting on the front steps of Islington Town Hall, since they weren't allowed inside, and a counter-protest turned up. 7 council members actually left their meetings inside to come out and thank the counter-protesters. During the 1977 GLC elections, the Campaign Against Racism in the Media, CARM, asked journalists not to publish letters from NF candidates and supporters, and to threaten industrial action against their bosses if they tried to make them cover issues in a racist way. Staff from the Hackney Gazette actually went on strike for 3 days after their paper published an NF advert. When the NF tried to hire meeting spaces from Conservative councils, they would sometimes charge such massive insurance premiums that the NF couldn't afford it. But in this case, not only did the council allow the NF meeting to go ahead, but 3,000 police were deployed to make sure that anti-fascists couldn't block the roads getting in. So locals couldn't peacefully protest the meeting either. Instead, 200 people from the Southall Youth Movement headed towards Southall Town Hall. Many were arrested before the NF meeting was even due to start. Anti-fascists threw smoke bombs and flares at the police, and someone even threw a petrol bomb at a police coach. In response, the police charged the protesters with riot shields, truncheons, horses, and even vans. A 30-seater coach carrying police and NF members drove straight at the crowd of protesters. 700 people were arrested, and a teacher called Blair Peach died from a fractured skull after a police officer hit him in the back of the head with a truncheon. No one was ever prosecuted for his murder, despite the police's internal report finding that 14 witnesses saw him being hit and naming 6 possible police candidates. But getting NF members arrested is another really good way to kill their momentum. One A&L member from Islington, where the NF moved their headquarters at the end of the 70s, said, around the same time, 9 of their hardcore were convicted of possession of firearms and armed robberies. The branch collapsed. This created a domino effect with other branches in North London, completely ceasing activity. The 1979 election was a disaster for the NF. They only won 1.3% of the national vote. If you run for election, you have to pay a deposit, which you only get back if you win a certain percentage of the vote. Each deposit is a small amount for a national organisation, but in 1979 the NF lost £45,450 in lost deposits. After that, coupled with Thatcher's rise to power, the NF were demoralised and dissipated. So let's go over what we've learned and which tactics worked in the 1970s. First, focus on the fact that they are fascists. Don't waste energy explaining why their policies are bad. Make them explain why they're not Nazis. Cause arguments between them. Split off the ones that aren't all the way gone. The more tiny splinter groups they're in, the better. Don't let them organise. Don't let them hold meetings. Block the road so they can't get in. Yell so they can't talk to each other. Make them ashamed to show their faces. And, it's a dangerous tactic, but threatening to throw rocks so that the police decide it's safer to ban their meetings has worked in the past too. Obviously, this one is going to be harder if fascists are meeting up online, so an anti-fascist might today want to think about how those tactics could translate. Maybe the modern equivalent would be like spamming their forums and their comment sections so they can't speak to each other, or getting their websites taken down. Next, if you're for fighting Nazis, that's it. Keep focused on the anti-Nazi message, which is still really popular. You don't have to work only with groups that you agree with on everything. You can always work towards other goals with other groups. Get kids on your side. Nazis love going after children, so you've got to give children an alternative that steers them away from fascism. Teenagers were some of the biggest Rock Against Racism supporters. If they've got illegal guns or are doing anything violent, dob them into the police. Getting them arrested works. Keep your priorities straight. If fascists are threatening to physically hurt people, then stopping that has to become your top priority over things like winning hearts and minds. Keep your community safe. No platform for Nazis. Debating their ideas only makes them look normal. They aren't normal, and they can't be convinced by strangers. They're never going to go, oh my god, Asians are human beings, I hadn't realised. Trying to politely convince them one at a time is like whack-a-mole, it never stops. A much more effective tactic is to stop them organising. And finally, and this is especially for anyone trying to go into this comment section in good faith, don't let fascists and people who are aligned with them tell you which tactics are good and which aren't. Obviously, they have a vested interest in giving you the wrong info on that. They're going to tell you that the stuff that works doesn't, and that you should do stuff that doesn't work instead. Look after each other, and in the words of my 1970s forebears, black and white, unite and fight.
But these are very frightening times, and the lessons learnt in Ra are that you've got to, it's an urgent emergency situation. And you have to use all your creativity. I use the phrase, all power to the imagination. You've got to be bolder than just simplistic ideas. You've got to really search out brave new ideas and creativity to challenge this idea of hatred. It's nothing but racial hatred.
But most importantly, what did we share with the white left? We learned from them as well. We shared the vision of a new world, our world, a world in which we were all equal, a fairer world. We were no longer those who would accept crumbs of a biscuit of colonial Britain. We didn't even want the packet anymore. We wanted the bakery.
Thank you for watching. I have one more thing to say about this, which is that you might have noticed this video contains some Nazi imagery and racist language. I checked the YouTube guidelines before I filmed it, and I don't think it comes close to breaking them, but it might get demonetized. Now, if it does, frankly, I think that's bollocks. There's nothing on here that you couldn't see on Channel 5 after the watershed, and adverts still run on that fine. I don't like censoring this kind of thing because I want you to understand how bad it was. I feel like if I beep out words, then I'm just covering up for some deeply racist dead people, and you might think, oh, it wasn't that bad. And frankly, if you read a history book, then this stuff won't be censored there either. I know YouTube is very strict about this sort of thing, but they have shown that they will ignore their own rules if the culture of the site does too. Look at how much copyrighted material is on here in the guise of reaction streams. So if Gala Bingo doesn't want to advertise on a video about defeating fascism, then I think that will say more about them than it does about me. I would therefore like to thank my patrons, who might well be the sole funders of this video. Even if it does stay monetised, there's no way that the YouTube ad money will cover anywhere near all the time I took reading books and finding newspaper articles and interviewing subjects. So, of course, my last thank you goes to Tariq Mahmood and Red Saunders. It's not often I do a video where the subjects are still alive and on Instagram, so it was very kind of them to get back to me and agree to share their experiences.
My new book that's doing the rounds, and for once my books are selling, it's called Sing to the Western Wind, and it's the story of an old Pakistani man who becomes a suicide bomber in Manchester, and it travels between the occupation of Afghanistan, Soviet Union, occupation of Afghanistan, America, and the total hypocrisy that he sees all around him in Britain.
Yes, I'd plug this book, yeah. So this book is called Reminiscences of Ra. Yeah, there's 79 people remember Ra and all the things that happened in Ra. There's people from all different communities talking about, and the constant thing is that the effect of Ra, the thing changed my life.
Links to their books are in the description.